What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do a really awesome build video for the ultimate beginner. If you are just getting into FPV racing or you want to do your very first quad build, this is a 2020 updated beginner build series on my channel, and I've done a ton of build series, but this one's using new components on here. We're going to talk about everything on here. You can have a 4S option, which I'll put the links down below for, and a 6S option, depending on which one you want. We're also going to give you options in this video for doing an HD setup. This is the RunCam Hybrid 3. It records 1080p at 60 frames per second, which is really nice, and it's a pretty good fast camera setup on here. They fixed a lot of the delay issues and the freeze up problems that they've had in the past. We're also going to put a pretty nice VTX on here as well. We're going to work with the TBS, that is the Nano Pro on here, and we have the HDLRC Zeus flight controller ESC setup. It is 35 amp ESCs, and you can run it from 3 to 6S. So again, a 4 or a 6S option in this build, and you can use different motors for 4S and different motors for 6S depending on which ones you want to use. These are the 2207, and they are low kV. They're under 2000 kV. They are 1775 kV. So these are going to be the 6S motors. If you want to run 4S, I suggest you get 2207 2450 kV motors, and those are going to be your 4S setup. So if you're still with me so far, we'll go ahead and get started with this build, and I'll walk you through this step by step. We'll also do some motor direction, we'll do binding, and we'll also do Betaflight in this video. So I'm going to have it all here for you. Here we go. Some of the items you'll need for this build are some 3M VHB, some snips, some hex drivers. You want some 60/40 solder and some steel wool for cleaning off the tip. This is your TS100 soldering iron, and possibly a wrench for the motor nuts. Now also, I like to have some wire snips as well as a solder sucker. This is nice for removing solder or making any mistakes. Also, in case you need to hot glue any of your antennas down, you can use a hot glue gun and some zip ties. Now, this is the Transtech laser frame. We're going to use this. It's a very high quality frame, nicely polished, and all the hardware is here. The first one we're going to start out with is the 3mm hex driver, so go ahead and get that one ready. You might also want some helping hands for holding the flight controller while you're doing some of the extra pad soldering. And it is nice that they have a blown out schematic for this frame kit. Some of them don't have that. We're going to start out with the M3 12mm screw on the outside edge of the arms, and this is the base plate here. You have your two top plates there that go on top of the base plate. This is the front, and the very back is in the bottom part of that bottom plate. You have longer arms and shorter arms in the front. So we're going to start out with the front arms. Go ahead and put your bolt through there. And just go ahead and drive it in. Don't drive it all the way down yet. Just kind of get it in there so you can still move it around a little bit, because you want to have some space when you're going to put these other arms in there. Don't crank it down tight just yet. Now we're going to do the back ones. Go ahead and put that outside screw on and through the collar plate there. Go ahead and tighten down that one, and now your next arm. And this should be your last arm. You can pause this video at any time during this process too if you need to. So now we almost have what looks like to be a quad. So back and front looks just like this. Short arms in the front, long arms in the back. Now we have the Zeus flight controller and ESCs here. The arrow indicates forward. Motor 1, 2, 3, and 4 are diagrammed just like this for your builds. Go ahead and grab your TS100 iron and go ahead and press the start button. We're going to go ahead and have it heat up to about 380 to 90 degrees Celsius. So that's 750 to 800 degrees, very hot, guys. We're going to go ahead and tin the first 3 motor wire tabs here. And you don't have to do it very long because these are small tabs. If you do it for a long time, you could have pad separation from the board and you'll ruin the flight controller and ESCs. Now we're going to mount the flight controller. But first we need to put these little grommets through, because this Zeus is very sensitive. And people have had reports of having some jello with this board. So you want to definitely dampen this board, and it will cause you less headaches down the road. We're also going to snip off the very top of those little grommets because they're a little bit too tall. I'm going to go ahead and take my standoffs. You guys can find the links down to standoff packs down below, just in case you need any extras. I would always order some of those and have some of those on hand. And those are the M2 standoffs, by the way. not the M3s if you're going to order some. So now that I've snipped those off a little shorter, the grommets are a little shorter now, allowing these top posts to go on. Now we're going to grab our motors, the 2207 motors. Let's go ahead and straighten out those wires. And the first thing we're going to do is grab some Loctite. You want some blue Loctite. Just dab a little bit on the end. And I usually just wipe it off with my fingers and put it through the bottom of the frame. Now while you're doing this, don't tighten that all the way up yet either, because you want to be able to slide the motor around, because you don't want that collar in the center on the bottom of the motor rubbing on the frame. So make sure that's nice and centered up right here. And now once you get it centered, you can go ahead and tighten all 3 screws nice and tight. That's looking pretty good. So not too hard so far, huh guys? So now you have all 4 motors installed. That takes a little bit of time. I like to take some zip ties at this point and just go ahead and put it around the arm to sort of tidy up the wires. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to bring these over to the tabs that they have to solder to. You're just going to bend them down and kind of tuck them under and bring them over like this. Once you measure that off to be a little bit longer than the tab, just snip them off at that point. And go ahead and just, snip these off with your fingers. It's really soft rubber on these forward motors. Really nice silicone actually. They don't burn when you touch them with a soldering iron, which is super nice. Now we need to tin these wires. This is the next step in this process. And this is not super hard, guys. It just takes a little bit of time, concentration. Now here you can use some tweezers if you need. I didn't mention using tweezers before, but they're always in my shop and I use them just about every build. And now when that feels nice and tight, and I might cut this video a little bit, guys, so I'm soldering these tabs just a little bit longer than what might appear in the video. And usually I start with the wire first and then I touch the tab with the heat. So get the wire hot, sizzling first, then tuck your wires underneath, and that looks pretty good. Wire first, tab second. That's the rule of thumb when you're soldering up motor wires. Now all 4 of them should be done for your quad at this point. We can go ahead and bring these wires up through the bottom of the frame. These 2 holes, positive on the left-hand side and ground on the right-hand side. You also have 2 capacitors in that kit, one large one and a smaller one. And I'm going to go with the larger one since I am going to be running 6S. And they make some awesome XT30 6S batteries that you can run that are a little bit lighter. They're in the 850 size and you'll still get 4 to 5 minutes flight time out of them. They're awesome. And I'll put some links down below for those. I believe those were made by G&B. Now we're going to solder up your battery terminals, and this is important when you're putting those down. Heat up the wire first. Don't heat up the tab and then heat up the wire, because it takes a while to heat up the wire. The thickness of this gauge is pretty thick, so you want to just kind of make sure the wire, the solder is sizzling. And here I'm using tweezers because these wires get absolutely piping hot. So just take your time there, run your soldering iron around. And if you flatten it out like that, guys, take it back off and do it again. You don't want these two to bridge or touch or even be close to touching. That's a pretty messy solder job for me. So a lot of times I'll just pull stuff back off and redo it. Make sure all your wires are nice and tidy. You don't want even a single strand sticking out on the side touching the other positive terminal, or you'll have the whole thing short out. So never be afraid to just stop what you're doing and start over and do it again. And if you have some nice solder and you get it nice and hot, it should look nice and shiny when you're done with the solder. If it looks kind of a little not so good, you want to make sure you do it again. If it looks a little bit tarnished, it has to look shiny when you're done. We're going to tin up both of these wires on the capacitor. Make sure you do not mix up positive and negative right here, because you will explode your capacitor. I've done it before on accident. Some of these don't have nice wire covers like these do. This one actually has red for positive and black. Most of them have black and black. And that's looking pretty good there, so we're going to leave that. I'm just going to bend that down a little bit and possibly put a zip tie over that. Might just leave it there for now. And you can put your your battery, 3M battery sticky tape on the bottom like this. You're going to go ahead and snip both sides of the outside in the back, and then you're going to stick it through that XT60 battery lead cable here, just like that, and around. And now that's going to cover up those bottom screws that we put through to the flight controller. We won't have access to those unless we take this off, which is kind of a bummer, but you can also snip around those posts that we have below that if you'd like to, and that way you'd have access to your screws and not have to take that off. But I'm in a hurry in this build because I want to show you guys how this goes together, and you guys at home are probably taking way more time to build than I am. So we're going to go ahead and zip tie this off to the frame. This is very important. If you're new, always zip tie your main battery lead off to the frame, because if it pulls, it will separate the tabs off your ESCs and ruin your flight controller and your ESC. So this is a really important step. Now we're going to grab the M3 16mm screws and the standoffs. These are your aluminum standoffs, and these might even be titanium. They're super light. Usually they make them out of steel, solid steel, but the titanium ones are really fancy. It's always a nice fancy kit when you get some titanium in the kit. And you can just tighten those down by hand, one by one around. And it's nice because this quad is a 4-bolt top plate release. So if you need to get inside this to work on it later, super easy access. This has been a trend for a couple years now. Really nice. That looks ready to go. So now go ahead and grab your Zeus 35 schematic. This shows you where the camera, VTX, and all different types of receivers here, how they hook up. We're going to use an XM Plus, and it's set up like this. We have the yellow wire, the red wire, and the black wire, and we're going to tin those wires first. The first one you're going to solder up is your S bus, second will be 5 volt, and the last one will be ground, just like that. And this is the same every single time. Been doing this one for years. So if you see that gold button on the top left, you know the signal wire goes on that left hand side. So now they actually have an S bus tab there, so we're going to do S bus, 5 volt, and ground, just like that. And I like to do the wires from the inside. Make sure you don't touch the next tab over with the wire, and you'll see it sizzle there, and then you know it's nice and hot. Now I usually push the wire against the iron, and I pull the iron away from the board like that, and I give them a tug, and they're soldered on nice. Now we're going to start with the camera install. The RunCam HD, this is an HD with DVR. The Split Nano 3 is just going to go slide right inside that TPU mount, and I'm going to extend this wire a little bit because I thought it was just a little bit short, and then I'm going to take some snips and snip this in about half here, and I'm going to save that wire for the VTX because I didn't have any extra VTX wire. If you buy the Unify Pro, you will get some extra wire with it. Now we're going to tin up those 3 wires there for the camera install, and the analog camera solders up the same way that this HD camera does. So this is kind of nice. So this is like 2 birds with 1 stone right here. Camera, 5 volt, ground, and that would be your video in, but here it's just labeled camera. VTX, if you see VO sometimes on a flight controller, that's video out. And that means that the transmitter is sending it back to your goggles. So that would be video out. There we go. Not my best solder job there, but it's done. Now we're going to go ahead and take those camera screws and put it right straight through that TPU mount. And I love this TPU mount. It has a lot of protection for that camera in the front. Now we're going to slide it down over your posts. Looking pretty good there. And if you get it upside down, you can flip that camera image over. Now for the TBS Unify Pro 32 Nano, it looks like this: 5 volt ground video and smart audio. You're going to go ahead and tin those wires up, and I'll show you where that smart audio solders up to the flight controller in just a second. After we get these wires soldered to the VTX, we can do that next step. So we have a connection to the video transmitter. Now the other side, we've tinned those wires, and at this point you want to go ahead and solder on your ground wire first up top, and go ahead and do your video wire next. It says VTX. That would be your VO, your VTX video out tab. And the next tab over would be your 5-volt tab. And you're going to tin those pads first and then put your wire on there. And now the TX1 wire is where your smart audio wire is going to go. So 4 wires coming off that VTX. Not too hard. So now that's all done. Now we're going to screw on the last 2 standoffs here. And those are on top of the RunCam DVR. Now we're going to go ahead and pop that down. Don't forget to put your SD card cover on. Now the last, we'll put one on top of there, another one, and all 4 there. Now we can mount the VTX on the very top of the RunCam DVR. And these are a little bit long. They take forever to put the little plastic nuts on, so I like to trim these back a little bit. Just makes it a lot easier, and they don't need to be so long for this build anymore. And sometimes I will poach parts off of old quads, but this is totally fine. Those are pretty cheap. Now you have the choice to use this style or the larger style antenna mount. If you have something like a Lollipop 3, it'll fit in the larger one. If you're using a dipole, you can use the smaller one like I used. Now snap on your dipole there. Now we're going to grab the M2 5x10 screws and these 2 smaller nuts. These are M3 nuts. And they go through these back holes right here. 1, 2. Now take that smaller piece and go ahead and slide it on those 2 bolts. And there's divots there for these nuts, which is kind of nice. Now you can go ahead and drive those down. So how's your build going so far? Hopefully you're well on your way at this point. And the more you solder, the better you'll get at it. So don't get too frustrated on your first build. I'm going to pull that dipole back through. And now we have the 4 top bolt. They should be countersunk bolts. I'm going to go ahead and put those through. And they gave me 1 panhead screw there. I had to get back in my M3 collection of screws and find another countersunk style bolt. And now I have 4 in the very top plate. And this is just about done. Look at all that extra space in there. So much extra space in there that we could fit the Caddx Vista in there where the TBS Unify is. That's really cool that will fit. And that will fit on a 20x20 mount. It has holes through the top of that Vista. Now we can take some antenna posts and just put over the top in the back here. Push down into that TPU mount. Looks a little bit fancy there. It also keeps the antenna wires from going into the props. Very important. Now 4S or 6S, depending on which one you choose to use a smoke stopper before you plug in your first battery. I'm just going to go ahead and plug mine in because I don't have an XT30 smoke stopper. And thank God that I have video. It's always a bad thing to not see video when you plug in your quad for the first time in your goggles. So now we're going to talk about motor direction. Very important. We're going to use the Gym Fan Hurricane props. These are some super fast props, and I'll put some links down below for those. You have right turn rear, guys. That's going to be a right turn motor. Left turn for motor number 2. Motor number 3 is going to be left turn, and motor number 4 is going to be right turn. So leading edge first, guys, in the way it travels to the right, left, left, and this last prop will turn to the right. And now we can do some receiver binding. We're going to bind in D16 because that's what the XM Plus is. So go ahead in the model menu of your OpenTX radio and go down to where you see FR Sky. Let's go ahead and go to the bind button there. Press that bind button, holding down that gold tab with a bamboo skewer, plug in your battery, and the XM Plus is fast. It will bind almost instantly. You'll see a green light on your receiver. Now I can just unplug it and it's bound. Now we're going to test out some motor direction, and word of caution, do not do this if you're not comfortable with this. I'm not responsible for what you do. So I will not put a motor nut on this when I test this, and I'm going to momentarily just flick the switch just to get it to barely move. And right now I have motor stop off, so I will have some motor spool up when this happens. So go ahead and grab your transmitter and flick it one time, and you're basically arming it and disarming it really fast. And so that one's moving to the right, so I know that one's good. Now testing on motor number 3 or motor number 2, again, that one's good. That one's going to the left. It doesn't matter which direction prop I'm using here because we're just looking for direction, motor turn. So another quick flip there, and that one should be turning to the left. That one's good. Now what about motor number 4? That one should turn to the right. Now let's go ahead and flick that arm switch again. Awesome. That one needs to be changed. So we'll go into BLHeli, but first we'll do a little bit of Betaflight for you guys. I'm going to show you what settings I have on my laser. And make sure you're using a USB cable that is a standard data cable, or otherwise it won't be able to connect to the flight controller. Now go ahead and set your quads flat on a table and press calibrate accelerometer. Now once it's done, we're going to move the quad around in space, left, right, forwards, and back. Make sure that everything looks like it does as you're moving in real life on the screen. That way your orientation is right. Now we're going to check out the ports tab. This is where your receiver is talking to your flight controller and where your smart audio is activated. Make sure that serial RX is checked there for UART2, and over here on the far right you want to have TBS smart audio selected on peripherals. Now go ahead and save. Press save down at the bottom right. It's going to take you out and go ahead and connect back in. And now we're going to go ahead back to the ports, double check everything is saved. That looks good there. Now going down to the configuration tab, we're going to go ahead and check expert mode here, so it'll give us more tabs, and I'll show you those a little bit later. D-Shot 600 is totally fine. Motor stop should be off. Do not click that. That looks good, and the motor idle speed looks good. Now it's right turn rear. This is where you can check prop direction on any quad. All of this looks good here for the system configuration. Turn off barometer and magnometer if those are on. And this is where you can name your craft, so you can name it anything you want, your FPV pilot name or the name of the quad, laser. I'm just going to leave Zeus 35 on mine. Arm angle should be 180. Receiver should be S-Bus SpecSat right there and S-Bus right there. Now let's go down to the other features menu here. Turn telemetry on for your OSD and make sure OSD is also checked here. And I'm going to turn on air mode for mine. Anti-gravity and dynamic filter looks good. And now for your beeper, we're going to have an ESC beeper, so we're going to turn that on. Both of those should be checked, RX lost and set. Now go ahead and save and reboot, and we're going to go back in, and this time we're going to go down to the power and battery tab, and I'm going to turn this minimum down to about 3.2 or so, and the same thing with the warning. I don't want it beeping at me every time I throttle out. So now, failsafe, we're going to set to drop. Always set it to drop. If you lose connection to your quad, it's important that it drops and not flies away. Now PIDs, we're going to leave exactly stock. If any of this changes at any time, I'll update the CLI link in the video description down below. Now receiver, you don't see anything working here right now. You don't have a battery plugged in. So what you need to do is make sure that you plug in your battery at this point. Turn on your radio first. Plug in your battery next. The quad will not it should not arm and fly off your table because you have the props off, number one, and Betaflight finally put a failsafe in there for you guys not to be able to spool up unless you go to the motors testing tab. So now everything is looking good. The throttle is moving up just like that. It should move this direction and back down. And now the pitch and the roll, as you move your sticks, they should go left, right, just like you see here on the screen, and forwards and back for roll. Now check the channel map on the far right there. Depending on what type of receiver you have and your channel setup, AETR is usually the one I use for FR Sky. So aux 1, 2, and 3 there. That looks good. I'm only using 3 switches on most of my quads: an arm switch, a mode switch, and a beeper switch. So now we're going to go down to modes, and you can go back and forth between the receiver tab and the modes tab to check. So I'm going to go ahead and set this over for you, and we're going to add a range. I'm going to select aux 1. We're going to slide this over to the end here because this will be the last point. It's only a 2-position switch, so when I flip it up, it should be in the yellow there. Now you can see that I'm moving aux 1. That's my arm switch. Now back to modes, and when I move my switch again, you can see it turns red when it hits that yellow bar. So position 0, there's nothing. Position 1 will show you that I'm armed. Now we're going to switch to auxiliary 2 there for that tab and move that slider over. And you can grab them by the center and move them around, or you can grab them on the ends and sort of scooch them in and out. Now for horizon here, I want horizon to be active. So I'm going to scooch those in. I'm going to save that, and it won't work until you press save. So if you make a selection or you do some changes, you won't see highlighted modes until you make that change. So now everything looks like it is working. Angle mode is stability mode, by the way. Now my mode switch, again, I'm moving my aux2 switch, and you can see both of those are active. And now all the way out to the edge, right here floating in free space, that would be acro mode, guys. There is no acro mode in this entire list. If you're looking for acro mode, it doesn't exist. It just floats in space on the end there. So your position number 3, you're going to use a 3-position switch for most of your flight modes. So now for the beeper, I'm going to use a separate switch. I'm going to use a switch number 3 that's aux3. That's usually my far right-hand switch on my transmitter. And that's a 2-position switch usually. So now everything looks pretty good. I'm going to save that again. And I'm going to delete those other 2 modes because I don't use stability. Motor testing, you can do this on the bench. You want to click and check that you understand the consequences, take your props off. And individually you can test motor direction here before you even do the other way I showed you. The way I showed you is kind of the old school way, but it's also the quick way. The more dangerous way, of course, but if you want to do it safely, you can take some tape, take some painter's tape, make a little flag on top of your motor, and watch which direction your little flag spins. Now OSD, guys, this is totally personal here. There's a whole list of stuff that you guys can put on screen for your goggles. You can move them, drag, drop things around on the screen, and reposition things. I like my battery voltage at the bottom left because most of us read left to right, and I like to see my battery voltage first. Usually my quad name goes in the very middle, and then timer 2 is what I like because it starts the timer from the time you turn the arm switch on. Now I'm also putting throttle on here because people like to see throttle percentages on my videos. Now I'm going to click save, and that looks good. So now you can click on Font Manager, and here's where you can change the font. If you can't see very well, you can make it bold. Just make that text a little bit easier to see, and I like to have mine bold on my quad. So I'm going to go ahead and click Upload Font there. Betaflight's going to restart, and now when you plug in the quad and check in your goggles, you should see that you have a different font on the screen. If it didn't take, you can do it again. And here, sometimes it won't show it on the display when you change the font, but it will actually be on the quad most times. Now all this looks good. We're just going to change the video transmitter over to 200 milliwatt. I'm going to put Fat Shark channel 1 on mine because most times I start out on Fat Shark channel 1. And when you're all done with that, go ahead and click save. And in the CLI, to find out what flight controller version you're using and what the firmware update is, you can type in version and hit return. Now some of the more experienced guys will know what a CLI dump is, and if you type DUMP, it will give you all of the flight controller's information into a singular file. So I'm going to save that for you guys, and we're going to put that as Transtech laser CLI dump on my Google Docs, and you guys can click on that link down below in the video description and save that. If you ever have a problem with your quad, or you reset something, or you mess something up, you can refer back to my CLI dump. Dump this into this CLI prompt right here, press return, and reload all these settings back into your quad. So now we're going to go out of Betaflight and we're going to go into BL Heli, because BL Heli is how you reverse motor direction. Remember, I had one motor that was going the wrong direction. For me, I got lucky this time. You only have to have one. So we got to close Betaflight first before you use BL Heli, because BL Heli won't work unless you do that. So because it's trying to take control of the motors. Now go ahead and plug a battery in. You want to turn on your radio first, plug in the battery, plug in your data cable to the USB port on your flight controller, and then you're going to go and you'll see all of these load up. And the one I need to switch, you see where it says normal? Make that reversed, and that will reverse that motor. Now I need to write to setup, and you see it went through all the ESCs there, and now I have a working quad. When you do your first line of sight test, guys, make sure you do it line of sight, not FPV. Very important that you hover your quad first, do it in stability mode, but try not to do it in FPV first, because people hit themselves on accident sometimes, so be careful. All right, congratulations. At this point, you should have a working 5-inch race quad or freestyle maniac quad. Let me know which one you decided to build. Was it the 4S version or was it the 6S version? Did you build the analog, the HD, or the DJI version as well? And if you're at this point in the video and you are totally confused about your receiver, it seems to be the first thing that people are confused about is my receiver's not working. So it can be a few things. Number one, it could be that you didn't get a good bind on your radio. Make sure D16 is selected in your model when you bind it up with the XM Plus for Taranis or OpenTX radios. Very important that you do that. That's step number one. After you've bound it and you get a green light on your receiver, inside Betaflight in the ports tab with this Zeus flight controller, it is important that you select UART2. In the ports tab, Serial RX should be turned on. There's a little yellow tab that slides to the right. When that's checked on, you should have a working receiver in the receivers tab, and that's where you go to check your radio. We talked about that before in the Betaflight section of this video, but the other thing that it could be is that in the configuration tab, you can click on that tab and go to the receiver section. It should say SpecSat S-Bus on the next two tabs there. The first one should be SpecSat S-Bus, and the next one should be S-Bus. So make sure both of those are selected, and you should have some moving sticks. If you don't, also another thing is that you can go back and check your soldering on your receiver wires. That's another issue that I've had before where I couldn't get my receiver working. I tried everything under the sun, and then I finally went back and resoldered things, started working. So there's a couple tips to hopefully help you guys get your receivers working. And again, if you have any issues, please do put a comment down below if you have any issues at all building this one, or if you have a question about any build that you've worked on. But go check us out on our Facebook page. It is Drone Camp's Drone Community, FPV Drone Community. And you can join up there. You can post pictures of your build. You can ask questions, and the guys would just jump on your questions. So if we can help you, we definitely will. But anyway, guys, I'm Justin Davis. Thanks for watching my videos, and please do subscribe if you want more information on FPV racing or drones in general. This is the channel to subscribe to. Take care, guys. Be safe. Stay inside. Do your builds. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.